today? Turnitin and rubrics and grading and marking and all that kind of stuff? Excellent. Notice that a whole bunch of people have already gone through the process or started the process of setting up assignment portals, which is fantastic. And again, most days and mornings, etc., is the best time, as a general rule, to get hold of me. Up until 12 o'clock, I can usually jump straight into kind of Zoom with people and finesse stuff in their subject sites or their assignment portals, etc., if necessary, or just talk about different ideas and things. So if you're in that category and wanted to do any of that, please just reach out. Okay, so Annabelle, I know that we had talked about a session looking at rubrics particularly. Emma, and now I'm just going to ask, is that this session, or are we looking at the grading and feedback process more generally with a touch of rubrics thrown in?
Yeah,
which one would you like?
Rubrics was supposed to be Thursday,
okay,
only because we added that in as the extra session. And this is the how do you give feedback and grade. But
yeah, perfect.
It sort of seems a bit back the front, but it was about when we got everything organised, I think.
Yeah, and look, that's fine. We can dovetail into both, so that's not a thing. So look, how about I share my screen if I'm able to do so, and we'll start having a look at some of the Turnitin portals, etc., that people were using in the last session to look at the grading and feedback process as it was used last session, and then we can talk a little bit about it for the session ahead and people's individual requirements. Okay. And I will say, if people have got questions as we go along, please don't be shy. Come off mute, put things in the chat pods, stick your hand up, whatever you like in terms of getting my attention, and we can engage with those. Right, so look, I've got my edit mode on, so the instructor view, and I'm about to go into a portal. One of the questions we get frequently is about changing due dates, if they've changed for whatever reasons, and how to shift those back. That cannot be done inside the Turnitin portal itself. It must be done through the I2 item after you've created it, right? So if we go into edit one of the portals, you'll see the due date is there. The same as if you were changing any other I2 item, you can shift the due date and that will flow through to Turnitin. So if you're ever in that position where you need to change the weighting or particularly the due dates, etc., you need to do that by editing the I2 item. That may come back to you at some point. The other thing I'd point out here is that there's an option when we edit the I2 item that talks about visibility, visible to students. Now, this is not talking about whether or not they can see the content inside the folder. So it's not talking about that visibility. It's talking about the grade center column. And the reason that that is important is that if the grade center column is visible, then any marks that come into it from Turnitin, for example, will also be visible to the students immediately. So this is why we need to make sure that the columns for your assessments are hidden in the grade center until you are ready for the students to see them. So you can change that either here when we edit the item, invisible to students. You could change that to no, that would hide the column. The other way that you could do it is by going into your grade center itself. I'll do that from here. Except the grade centers are all locked for last session. All right, let's go into one for this session. Let's do this one. Okay, so we've got some Turnitin portals here, and at the moment they're visible. So the academic has set up the tasks in this subject, but has not hidden the columns, which means that as soon as she starts marking essay number 1 and putting feedback Feedback is not visible to the students because that is controlled by Turnitin, the release date that we set. But the grade, as soon as it goes through in Turnitin, it flows straight through to the grade center, which means that it'll appear in here and it will be visible to the students in My Grade. And at that point, the academic gets an email at 3 o'clock in the morning with the student saying, why did you only give me 17? And they've only just begun the marking process. So we don't want these columns visible to students until you're ready for them to be released. And the simple way of hiding those is to go into the column, hit the drop down and put hide from students. At that point, we get that cross through with the red line and they don't get the grades until we're ready for that to happen. That same setting that I showed you a minute ago, visible to students, does exactly the same thing. If you set that to no, then they're not going to be able to see it as well until you're ready for it. So that's it's an important one to pick up, and I will change the other one for Laura because she's obviously overlooked that part. It is in the guide, we do mention it, but yeah, until you've experienced that email from the student that's wanting to challenge their grade immediately, you might overlook this bit. All right.
Lachlan, sorry to disturb. Just on that point, can I have clarification that if you leave it and turn it in as yes and have it, the little arrow across it in grade center, the students, it's not visible to the students. If in turn it in, you select no, it's still not visible to the students. Does that little red line in grade center show so that it's not visible to the students?
Okay, so thanks, Jen. It's basically when you edit the item inside your assessment folder and you're looking at this visible to students bit, this will reflect what the grade center is. So if you change it here, that will flow through to the grade center and it will have the red line through it, not visible. At that point, no matter what's happening in Turnitin, the grade will not flow through into My Grades for the student.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that if you do it through this page here that you've got on the screen now,
yep,
and you say no, that it then triggers that red line to come up on. Thank you.
Exactly right. Yep.
Thank you.
All right. So I mean, some people kind of you'll be going back into the grade center at some point to basically look at, you know, whether your items add up to 100 and whether they've been set up right, etc., as part of your, I suppose, your QA, I suppose, process. And I'll be looking at all of them anyway, just because that's the sort of person I am. But Sharon, you've got a question.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to be absolutely clear. So if I tick that no box, or
yep,
nothing, the mark will still go into grade center, it just won't be visible.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. So all it means is that the column
and unclick the red line.
Yeah, that's right. And again, you can do it in both places, right? So that if you make the setting change in here, it flows through to the grade center. If you make the change in the grade center, it flows back through to here. They both point to the same thing. So yeah, that's right. And it's talking about whether or not it's going to be visible in My Grades. That's ultimately what we're trying to make sure the students don't see until we're ready for them to see it.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Nicole, you've got a question there. When it hits the due date, will that box be overridden? No, and it's a really good question, and I appreciate that it is a bit fiddly. I think with that in mind, I'm going to go into the Turnitin portal to talk about that feedback release date. So it's a good pickup. So let's do that. I'm going to go into the folder for the task and open the link to the portal, the same as the students do. But when it opens for me, I'm going to see my dashboard, my inbox with my whole class in it. The students only see their own if they've uploaded one, or the opportunity to upload one if they haven't. All right, so this one's obviously from a previous session, it's been used. When you look, yours will all be empty, I'm assuming at this point. When you click on the cog or the settings for the assignment up here in the top right-hand corner, we get a brief view of the task settings that we've put in there when we created it. So you'll see that the due date here is grayed out. Note that I can't change it. That's what we were looking at a minute ago. If you need to change the due date, you do it in I2. The feedback release date, you can change if you need to push it back or bring it forward. We had instances last session where people were saying, my students need their feedback right now. It's like, well, okay, change the date. You can bring it forward if you want to or push it back. When we hit this date and time, any comments or grade or anything that has gone into Turnitin up until that point by you will be available to the student in Turnitin. They would have to come in to Turnitin and look at their submission, and they'll see the grade, the feedback, the comments, etc. That's what this timer refers to. The actual score itself, and we'll look at some of those in a sec, flows through immediately from Turnitin into the grade center. And that's why we were hiding that column. Does that make sense? Okay. So if I look at the inbox and we have a look at the difference between, so those scores, as soon as they were entered in, they went straight through into the grade center sitting there. If the column was hidden, no harm, no foul. The students can't see it until you're ready to unhide it. But when we hit that feedback date, the return date, they can come back in here, and instead of just seeing their similarity score, they'll see the grade, they'll see the feedback, they'll see the comments. Okay, so that's how that setting applies. Now, in terms of assignments that are uploaded in here into your dashboard, I think what might be helpful is if I upload an assignment as a student and we have a look at one as a marker from that point. So I'm going to do that now in another subject. This one looks pretty good. And what I can do, and you're more than welcome to do this obviously in your own sites as well, turn on your student mode. And then you can go into your Turnitin portals, assuming they're not hidden to students. I apologize for how slow everything is at the moment. It seems like everyone's using I2 all at once to set things up. So it is a bit slow. Maddie has a question. Do the students get notified on when the feedback's available? Well, it's in the instruction. It's in the subject outline for the task, and it's going to be 2 weeks after. Do they get an actual notification? They do not. And the caveat around it, which has nothing to do with Turnitin, is to do with individual notification settings. If a student has changed their I2 notification settings, they'll get notified when a task has been marked and when the grade is in the grade center. But very few people have those notifications turned on. Okay, so look, I'm coming into the portal as a student. And here's our student view. The student has the opportunity to upload a submission or to also reveal the instructions for the task, which will also include the rubric if there's one attached. There isn't to this task, which makes me think actually I want to jump into a subject that does have one so that we can work with the rubric itself. So forgive me for that. I'm going to get a better subject because I know the academic has done it. Student mode. Let's keep my data, keep all the data, that's good. Go into Turnitin assignment, enter the portal. And you'll see straight away the difference when the rubric has been loaded. And a student has already started. I have already uploaded something in here. Perfect. Okay, great. If I unpack those instructions now, you'll see the rubric is over here. It's attached to the task. The student can look at the rubric before they get grades, etc. They can have a look at it up front if they're not looking at it in the subject outline or something, for example. They can open that up and that will show them what is in this case a qualitative rubric, if they're interested in that before they submit the task. Otherwise, they will be hitting that upload button and putting their assignment in here. If they need to resubmit, that is over here on the right-hand side where this up arrow is, and they can upload indefinitely up until the due date. So they can click on that resubmit paper option and upload their document. It'll go straight over the top of this one with a new similarity score. It doesn't match, so it won't be 100% because another one was already in there. It overwrites it. So that's how the resubmission process works. And at that point, the student could open their paper, for example, and have a look and get the details on this similarity score. This one was 0, so I don't have any sources, etc. But there's nothing else in here yet for them. If I go into that same paper as an instructor, which is exactly what I'm going to do now, I'll exit the student preview. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Back into the assignment area and enter the portal as an instructor. Whilst that's loading, oh no, Sharon's answering stuff there, I think.
Now I have another question. I copied and pasted something that, so my apologies for that. There is another question.
Okay, I'll get to that in a second. Okay, look, my paper's not in there at the moment. I don't know why that is, but that's all right. We can do another one. Let's say...
I think you went to the second assignment, not the first one.
Really?
Yeah.
So the first ones are quizzes. That's why I didn't go into those.
Ah.
But you might have a point. Anyway, that's okay. I can, we can grade someone pretend. Let's do that. There is an option here if you have a student that hasn't submitted a paper for whatever reason to do a thing that allows you to grade without an actual document in there. So it sort of creates a pro forma at that point. I can get rid of it, but I'm just going to open it up because I want to have a look at the grading process. So let's pretend we're John Kennedy and we're going to grade his paper. So we've hit the due date. It's time for grading. And I've gone into hit grade. And there's nothing in the paper at the moment, but that's okay. What we have on the right-hand side here is our marking panel. The first section being the quick links. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at these or not, but there is a collection of pre-made quick marks banks that you can choose between. I might just shift across to commonly used for the moment. You can add your own. You can add to the existing ones if you want to. You can share comment banks between you, and the way they work is you click and drag them into the student's paper as you go. And a lot of the default ones that are in there are language centric. But if you've got ones particular to your discipline, to your topic, to your marking team, you can certainly create those and share those between you. Maddie.
Hey, just going back to the resubmission process,
Mm-hmm.
one of my students are having trouble resubmitting their revised paper. And I'm just wondering if that's because I haven't clicked something in optional settings.
That's an excellent question. I would say the answer is definitely yes. Shall we have a look at where that is?
Yes, please.
All right. So slight segue. Let's do that. We'll go into one that already existed. Okay, so I'm going to open the settings for the assignment again. Under optional settings, if you scroll down, the stuff to do with resubmission is further down here under similarity report. And the option that needs to be there is generate reports immediately, but they can resubmit until the due date. The way that that works after the due date is any submission is final. Okay, so that is the setting. The options that are there, there are 3. One of them is generate reports immediately. Students can't resubmit. And that might be what you find is selected in yours potentially. Yeah. So it does need to be resubmitting until the due date. It's the middle option, basically. After 3 resubmissions, reports take 24 hours to be generated. That's a Turnitin thing. All right, I'll also take that opportunity to look at Sharon's question. If they submit late, does Turnitin automatically adjust the return date? No, it doesn't. Basically, that process needs to be manually handled by you. Yep. So they are able to submit and upload their assignment, and you can mark it, etc. But if you've passed the return date, as soon as you put something in to turn it in, it's going to go back to the student. They're going to be able to see it.
Lachlan, while you've got that section open, can you
Sure.
just go through what those terminologies mean as far as like the bibliography materials, quoted materials, and small sources?
Absolutely. So, I mean, they're discretionary because we have people that have different requirements in this regard. But basically, we allow students to see the similarity reports so that they can make changes to their submitted work. And that's in line with CSU's academic integrity policy, that it's meant to be educative and that the students are learning by doing. Exclude bibliographic means that if they've marked things as citations, for example, or as a reference list at the bottom of the paper, it's going to be excluded from a similarity check. That's if that one is checked. Quoted materials, so that's going to be inline quotations and citations. It takes inverted commas and apostrophes as citation indicators. Small sources. Basically, if we were doing a match and I was picking up, if I hadn't marked this, if there was even one word that was similar in another paper, Turnitin would count it as a match. It starts to get a bit problematic. So small sources usually indicates, some people have it at 3, 4, 5. It can be as many as you like, but usually 5 is a fairly commonly accepted small source minimum. So it means 5 words in a row are the starting point for the search that it's matched against someone else's paper. Does that make sense? Yep.
Yes, thank you very much. That's really good.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And again, this is on you whether or not you want to increase it, reduce it, use those settings and see how they go, and what the matches come back like, for example. I know that in each course, and sometimes individual markers as well, the number that they're really giving an indication to students that if your match is above X, it's a problem and I'm going to look at it further. I know the academic integrity officers have a broad sort of blanket rule of less than 5 and more than 20 is something that they're going to investigate further. That's their kind of standard take on it, because how can a student get 0%? They must have got some from somewhere. Or how does a student get more than 20 without having lifted something from somewhere? So everyone has, I suppose, different parameters in that regard. For my own teaching, generally, the advice, and I get students that will ask it constantly, is always, what's the number? There isn't a magic number as such, but generally speaking, I think that 20 to 30%, 20 to 25% even is a pretty decent indicator that I need to engage with the paper more to look at where that information is coming from, and I'm going to be looking closer at the similarity report. That's my guideline as a general rule. Now, yours might be lower, higher, whatever the case may be. Some disciplines have a whole lot of text and materials that need to get repeatedly used. So those matches are going to be higher. So it's again, that's when I say it's discretionary. There's different use cases for each. Sharon.
Yes, so if we're using things like NMBA documents or the code of ethics, the standards for practice, I think what I'm hearing you say is we could increase that exclusion threshold, because you can't, it's not necessarily easy to paraphrase the standard for practice.
So there's 2 answers there. One of them is if they're marked as quotes or citations, they're going to be excluded because they'll be quoted materials. So they won't count towards the match. So as long as they've referenced it, then it'll be excluded.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably the shortest distance to that response, rather than trying to change the minimum small words match. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions at that point before we keep going?
I've just got one, Lachlan. If you use a quick mark comment, can it be reused in the same paper? Because I noticed when you dragged it out of that column, at that right-hand column, it moved away, so it didn't show again.
No, absolutely. It can be used as many times as you like. I think that was just to do with it hadn't refreshed yet, or it's waiting for me to come back to it or something. But no, you can certainly use the same comment many, many times.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let's get back
Lachlan,
into the paper.
Sorry, just a quick one again.
Go ahead.
From your experience with, like, say, late submissions, would you advise people to not tick the late submission option on the Turnitin in this optional settings, and have it just come to as the subject convener to upload onto it? Or would you advise to use this optional settings here and allow people to submit late, like depending on, like, say, I'm concerned about volume, because as a result of COVID, we've been extending a lot of people's extensions and due dates, and it could be anywhere to between 20 to 40 students that this could be occurring with. So would it be easier to just allow late submissions rather than have it come through as an email for us to do individually?
Look, my take on it is absolutely, because there are always lots of different extenuating circumstances, and one of my first concerns is making sure the student can submit their assignment, whether it's hit the due date or not. So rather than having to manually handle and deal with all the email traffic around individual circumstance, I generally, this is on 99% of the time from what I've seen, unless someone has a really firm reason for not having it on and acknowledges that that's going to result in a lot more student contact around why they can't submit. So definitely. And if we look at, if I jump out of this portal, we look at the dashboard that was there, you'll see all of these are red, right? So there's a whole stack after the due date, and they would have been students with extensions. They would have been all sorts of reasons, those that did, that didn't. I guess the point being that at the moment, Turnitin does not handle those circumstances. Mm-hmm. The only thing that we have control over is whether they can submit or not submit. Otherwise, is how extensions are handled, if there's an effect on the grade, etc. All of those have to be handled by yourselves. Yep, at that point. Sharon?
If the assessment is submitted late, so for example, whatever the reason is there capacity for an email notification to come through, or
no? The short answer is that Turnitin doesn't have any notifications to the instructor when assignments are submitted or coming in. It doesn't. Yeah, unfortunately, the integration relies on you going in and checking those. The way that the columns are ordered and what you see at the top when you go in, I'm aware that a lot of you have subjects with hundreds of students in it. So I can appreciate that it's a real concern knowing when things are coming in and not. One thing you can do is use the uploaded, you can click on each of these headings to filter all of your submissions. So if you wanted them alphabetized or through title, but you can also use the uploaded column, which will show you the most recent submissions as a way of ordering them. So that was the oldest ones. I can click it again. Those are the most recent ones. So you can filter how the columns show the information as one way of I guess, keeping you appraised of the more recent submissions. The other thing that you get going on is as soon as there is a submission within Turnitin, it will be updated within the grade center. This is a locked one. That's not much good to us. Let's find one that is not locked. So within the columns, you're going to get a notification inside here, a visual notification showing that there are submissions waiting to be graded. So it looks like a little yellow circle with an exclamation mark in it. So that's another way, if you're not going in and checking the individual Turnitin portals weekly or whatever the case may be, if you'll also glance at your grade center, you'll be able to see needs marking notifications inside your grade center. All right, I want to get back into looking at the paper itself, as I realize that I'm jumping all around the place here with different questions and responses. So keep the questions coming. If I can find the paper that we were looking at, our blank brilliant student paper, we were looking at quick marks briefly. There's a little bit on quick marks in the guide. In the YouTube channel that is also referred to in the guide, there's a video on how to use and create your own quick marks banks. But basically all of it is accessed through this cog next to quick marks, and that will allow you to create your own quick marks bank and upload the expressions that you want in your quick marks to drag in. You can also export your quick marks. You can download them and then share them. So if you're in a marking team or you have a group of you wanting to use the same quick marks banks, and that was done quite commonly in the first session the trial was used, when we had people on the same marking team, they came up, I think they shared a Google document or something and came up with the quick marks they wanted to use. And then they put it together in a bank and then uploaded the bank so that each of them had it. You only need to do it once. Any change you make in here is attached to your Turnitin profile, not this assignment. So if you go into another subject or another essay or another assignment, for example, you'll be able to access all of your quick marks banks. So they are portable as such if you decide to use those. In the second section, we have two types of feedback possible, one being a summative comment, if you will, up to 750 words or thereabouts. It's about 5,000 characters, but works out to be about 750 words. You can type in here progressively if you like. You can also copy and paste from Word documents or other things if you wanted to. What we established recently was that you can also paste in tables. So if you had a table in a Word document that might have your marking schema in it, for example, and you wanted to paste that in, you can also copy and paste that in there and then type in it. So it's quite flexible. Can also take hyperlinks, but up to 750 words is the character limit. It also has voice feedback that you can attach, at which point you get a comment up to 3 minutes. So you might click that. It'll start recording. I'll go, right, John, this is the greatest thing I've ever read. You've changed my life, blah, blah, blah. And I could pause at that point and then continue adding comments progressively throughout his paper if I wanted to, or I could just do one, 2-3 minute stint or whatever, and then stop when I'm ready. Once that happens, I could listen to it again. I think I am. We'll just make sure that I'm sharing sound. Recording. I'll go, right, John, this is the greatest thing I've ever read. Right. So basically, it will pick up on whatever input you're using, headset or otherwise. Once you're happy with it, you hit save. If it's garbage and you don't want to do it or you want to redo it again, you hit the bin and it'll remove it. Okay, so that's the voice comment feature. And the last part of the marking options on the right-hand side is the rubric itself. And when you first click on it, you get this abridged view, if you like, condensed view with sliders. Most people will be clicking on these crosshairs that are at the top right-hand corner, and that will open the rubric in full. At which point, this is a qualitative rubric, which means that we go in and go, right, John, for criterion 1, identifies the legal issues, blah, blah, blah. Okay, credit. And the second one, that one, that one, that one. For example, all the way through, and that auto saves to the student's submission. At which point, when you close this, either hitting close or close, it's attached to his feedback, and you'll see that those sliders have now adjusted. You can go in and make changes to those, and it also gives you a summary of the actual criterion, headings, etc. underneath. Any evidence to suggest that students prefer recorded to written? I do get asked this fairly frequently. There's certainly research around about the efficacy of multimodal feedback, different modes of feedback being effective to students. Whether it's the Turnitin recorded audio feedback tool, not that I'm aware of specifically calling out the effectiveness of that type of feedback. From the first session we're using it, there was probably 10% of the markers decided to use audio feedback. I'd be interested to see if that number changes in the second session, but it really comes down to a personal preference. Yep. And I think probably consistency as well within, particularly if you've got a large cohort and different markers, if one of them's giving audio feedback and another one isn't, there's potentially an equity issue there, and you're going to have students questioning that. Why did, Sharon over there get 3 minutes of her academic giving her all this feedback and making meaning of the task, etc., and all I got was your lousy 2 sentences on mine, so it's something to be aware of. If you're going to use it, I guess use it consistently. Yep.
Lachlan, just information for people. The CLTC, which is the Curriculum Learning and Teaching Committee, is going to look at feedback across the school this next session. So we don't have any sort of hard and fast rules or anything like that at this point, but we're looking to build an idea about, what we see as sort of good, what's enough without being rewriting the entire paper for the student, because we've had a number of staff members say, well, how much do I ask a sessional staff member to write? Is this too much? Is this not enough? So we will do that work this session and have answers later on. But for the time being, I think what we're saying is have a go, see what feedback you get, report that. If you get good feedback and you use the audio tool, report it back to Lachlan and me or Sharon Laver or Jen Manning or Keaton. That would be great, and we'll build that into stuff that we take back to the Curriculum Learning and Teaching Committee. Thanks, Lachlan.
Yeah, look, it's all feedback is good in terms of from you to us about this process and what you're finding works and doesn't work. We had all sorts of feedback coming through in the first session about how effective this was. And that was obviously from a relatively small sample size of people using it. But also keep in mind that the mix of what types of feedback tools they were using varied hugely. Some people extensively used quick marks when they put time in developing a quick marks bank, and we're not putting particularly a large volume of text into the summative comments, for example, and had marked up the rubric. Other people, 750 words, no problem within the text comment, and did nothing within the paper itself in terms of marking it up. So again, there's all that scope of how much you want to use each of these things, and we can look at some of these papers and the feedback that went into them. That's a fairly high one. I think the task was 25 potentially. How much feedback was there? If we have a look at the summative comment at the end. Okay, there's a bit there. They didn't use audio feedback, but if we scroll throughout the document, we'll see that they're putting commenting in there. Sometimes they're very, very brief throughout the document. Other times we'll find that they've actually written directly into the document. So they've not used quick marks as such. They've just started typing, which is another option. What else have we got going on? Okay, so there's a quick mark there that's been dragged in there. Here they've written directly into the text. Can everyone see that? Okay, you do that by literally clicking anywhere in the text. That's a quick mark. That's a comment, sorry, that's a quick mark, and that's free text. If you choose the balloon, you get the balloon with the text that you got to click on to see it. If you choose the T, that's what it looks like. You get the text straight on top of the document. All right, so you can annotate and mark up in different ways, or you can choose from your quick marks library. I think most people using those, we're just dragging them straight into the text anyway from the box on the right-hand side. So yeah, there are no sort of hard and fast rules about how much and of which type. That comes down to you. And ultimately, of course, you're going to be influenced by what your students are expecting to see or what they think is normal. So obviously transparency around that's going to be pretty important. I'll stop there and see if I've got some questions, etc., that I haven't done. Janet, you've got a question there about the 3 times, right? You can submit an infinite amount of times up until the due date. The 3 times refers to how quickly they get their similarity reports. So if you've submitted more than 3 times, resubmitted more than 3 times before the due date, it actually takes 24 hours to get your similarity report after that. That's what that applies to. So if you've got a student, using it a 5th time, it's going to take them, they'll have to wait another day before they can do it again. The good news, I suppose, is that the portal is specific only to the one task. It's not shared with any other tasks. It's not like they're trying to upload multiple different assessment types into one Turnitin portal and having to wait for a turnaround. It is only for this task. So that's the difference between that and the generic portal that the students might have been using, the student portal, and having to wait periods of time and turnarounds for all of their assessments. Yep.
Oh, sorry. Well, when you were using Grey Arm in the rubric, you clicked on what you'd scored it. How does it calculate then the individual mark, like up to grades, or does that get inputted separately, or do you just put the end mark in? How does the scoring work?
That's an excellent point. Okay, so we looked at the rubric and we'd given that, but this is a qualitative rubric, which means it doesn't actually have any influence on what the grade is, right? The grade would need to be typed in manually. If we said, right, he got 18, and then that then flows through to the grade center.
So is that 18 overall and not per each criterion in the rubric?
It's not for the criterion, for a qualitative rubric, right? So in a qualitative rubric, it's just an indication for the students. If I open it up again, and we'll look at this compared to a quantitative rubric in a sec. All this is an indication to the students of where you feel their submission fell. It's not actually giving a score at this point anywhere. You're going to have to tally that somewhere else if you're using this approach, a qualitative rubric approach. So some people have talked about, having a notepad or something next to them when they're marking, and identifying what they got for each criterion for the final mark, and then typing that in here in the final grade. A quantitative rubric in Turnitin has a preset number identified against each column. Now, there's 2 ways to distinguish between this. One of them is a custom rubric and the other one is a quantitative. Quantitative means everything within this column has the same value. So if we said that anything in the high distinction column equated to 19 out of 20, there's no facility within it to grade within a range or to say 19.5 or 19.2 or anything like that. And it's everything within the same column. Now, very rarely do people create rubrics with this in mind. And so your criterion probably have a whole bunch of different values within each, rather than each being worth the same point value. So that's why a quantitative rubric can be problematic. But a custom rubric, when we create them, allows you to determine the value for each cell within the rubric as a preset value, right? You can't type it in progressively as you're marking. If you're going to use it, you actually have to have decided upon what the value for each of these columns is going to be. So this might be 19 and 17 and 14 and 12, etc. And when you click on those in here, it will tally the score for you and give you the end mark automatically. That's a custom rubric. So when we go through the process of attaching a rubric to an assessment, and I'll go through that in a sec, so we can have a look at how we choose between each type. That's basically the scope of what we're able to do in this tool with rubrics. It's not particularly flexible in terms of the rubrics automatically calculating scores for you. And that's a feature of the Feedback Studio. There are other Turnitin products that people might have used elsewhere, where the use of rubrics, for example, is a little bit more flexible. The GradeMark tool that Turnitin has as well is an example of that. Well, we don't have that at CSU at the moment. We've just got the Feedback Studio. Annabelle, you've got a question, comment?
Oh, thanks, Lachlan. Firstly, you remember your rubrics have gone through QA, so make sure you use the words that are in there, but Lachlan will have some ideas about how we can look at organising this. But Maddie and Lachlan and I were in a meeting last week, I think, where I wonder if showing that table, Lachlan, how we got round that, where you click in the
final comments.
Yeah, and that then allowed us to add in and then overwrite the mark at the top, which would allow people to mark the way that they may prefer a little bit more sort of, I don't know, latitude with marking, but still be able to just click in the box and then just have that little table that they could tally into the final mark, which might help people with the way that they prefer to do it. That's all.
All right, look, what I'm going to do just to demonstrate what we're talking about here. Let's say we had a Word document separate that we were going to use for marking. And we basically had our criterion that we were using for our marking or our marking requirements. And we wanted to be able to type the marks that the student got for each along the way. So I've got a table. If I take that table, select it and copy it, I can in fact provide that within the text comment inside Turnitin. And what that means is that I could fill this out progressively as part of my marking. Right, so if I'm going through and sort of saying, right, the first part, you got 8 for that, 9 for that, 10 for that, etc. And then you've got your tally, and then you write in your final mark up the top. That will be a way of keeping track of this if you've got a marking guide as such. It's still a manual process, I appreciate. It's not finessed as such, but given some of the shortcomings of the rubric tool itself to calculate the grades, this might be attractive to you as a solution. Judith, you had your hand up?
Yes, I was just a little bit confused. I thought at the last meeting you said that there was the possibility of adjusting the marks as they were calculated.
You can't do it within the actual rubric tool itself. That unfortunately that's not possible within the feedback studio. So I think we might have been talking about a few different things at the same time in that last meeting, like some of the other types of Turnitin possibilities like grading forms. But at the moment, we're just talking about the feedback studio itself and what it can do with the rubric tool. And it doesn't allow that level of flexibility with the rubrics beyond setting a value within each criterion cell. So you can't type it in as you're marking that each cell is worth a particular value. Maybe if I set one up, and I'll show you what I mean, because we're sort of talking about things without demonstrating it. So I'll go through that process in a sec. Brendan, do you have something you want to add in there?
Yeah, sure. While you're just setting that up, Lachlan, it's probably more an Annabelle question. As far as then us setting this rubric up, is the school wanting a qualitative or quantitative or custom rubric? And do you want specific numbers attached to each mark?
You already have, so you already have your rubrics that are in your subject outlines.
Yes.
Okay?
Granted.
And I think at this point, given that most people are learning this system, some of our colleagues who've come from other universities and many of our paramedic colleagues are a little bit more experienced with this. What I would say to you is I think people just this session learn to do what they can, because we also understand that people have different levels of comfort with how they would use a brand new system and how into it they're willing to get. So there are people who've jumped in, got their portals got done, and they feel very comfortable, but there are others who probably just want a bit more assistance. And to do a one rule fits all, Brendan, I think it might be moving too fast for some people who just need to take a bit more time to learn the system. And I think we've got to be appreciative of everybody where they are. And I think at this point, Lachlan's showing us the options, and then people will come either to Lachlan or to me and say, well, what do you think I should do? I feel like I could do this one, but that one seems like it would be a bit more complicated and I'm not really sure of the technology. So I think I mean, we want to bring people along with the change. We don't want to say, come on, quick sticks, everybody's got to do it one way. We'll develop this session, and I think over the time, as we all become much more experienced with it, we will come to a place where we say, oh, I think this sort of rubric is going to fit our school primarily better, and we'll get some feedback on that. But I think at this point, Brendan, let's people have a go, see how it works. They've always got Lachlan if something is not going as well. Oh, I thought I'd start with this sort, but it hasn't really fitted what I do. What do I do, Lachlan? Or you know what I mean? So I think that's where we'd be better off going at this point. And I would love to give a hard and fast answer, but it would mean that everybody would have to learn one way, even if it didn't suit how they felt the system would work after what Lachlan is saying.
I think, look, what I'm going to add into that, Brendan, is that from the first part of the pilot, probably about 95% of the people using it used a qualitative rubric. That's what I
feel
would
also
be
too.
saying.
It will be dictated also then who your marking team are too and their experience on the system, because they're going to expect something to work one way that they're used to.
Yeah.
And then if we set it up, say, as a qualitative one and they're not used to using a qualitative one, they're going to obviously provide that feedback quick, smart to the subject convener and say,
and it can be adjusted basically up until the time when you're actually marking the task.
That's right. It was more of a question is what from a school perspective, what are we expected to do? So the fact that we're allowed to have free reign is encouraging.
Well, just let's have a go for this session, and I think people will come down on one side or another. They'll say, "Oh, yeah, I tried that. It didn't work so well for the first one, and I did the other way for the second one, and that suited me better." But you know, we might find that custom becomes the way we go. But well, I think this is about discovery rather than making hard and fast long-term decisions. For your marking teams, please remember to send them the guide that Lachlan sent everybody. And if anybody doesn't have it, let either Lachlan or me know, and I'll send it on, or Lachlan will send it on, because your marking teams, that they can get as much out of that guide as what you can.
Judith, did you want to raise something there?
Yes. Did you say that there were going to be some more lessons for people who are perhaps interested in other versions?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think that we can have as many sessions as we want to have, looking at other ways of utilizing the tool set or experimenting with different approaches. That's not a problem. I don't have an issue with that. Obviously, our first concern leading into session starting is making sure that all the portals are in place so the students can start submitting. The rubrics to me are secondary because they can be added later on, they can be adjusted later on. But in the first instance, we want to make sure that all the grade centers and the submission portals are in place. So that's generally where my attention focuses first and foremost. Okay, I want to have a look at the actual Turnitin template. Now, we provided this file and it's also linked to in the guide. But basically, when you're adding your rubrics from your subject outline, you'll be copying and pasting text from it into these templates. It's important that you use them because they have been set up in a way that Turnitin likes. And we try and keep it as simple as possible. And you'll notice that even underneath the headings, the criterion headings, what we're saying is leave the heading in place, criterion and the number, and paste in your individual specific stuff for the criterion underneath. Whether or not that's a number or how much it's worth or what it's called, it's because Turnitin has a character limit on that heading. And everyone, if you've got more than 8 characters or something in your criterion, it just cuts it off and it's unintelligible at that point. So that's why we say leave the heading in place and you paste in your bit underneath. First criterion, blah, blah, blah. So whatever that might be, you've just copied and pasted that in there. And then we've said you've copied and pasted in each of your different areas for the scale, this, that, the other. Now, if you don't have any text in there, this comes with 9 columns by default, but you can remove them. If you've got, if you don't have that many, if you need more, then you can duplicate those underneath and continue to use other criterion.
Can you just show me how to duplicate, Lachlan? Because I tried copy and pasting and it didn't take on the system.
Yeah, look, the best way to go, were you doing it in Turnitin or in Excel?
I was doing it off this document.
Okay.
And then I just tried to create an extra row. And by just putting an extra row, it didn't carry over this criterion and bracket information.
Yeah, you might. So it might be a combination of the two. So what I would be doing, for example, is highlighting the row.
Yeah.
And then right click and insert. It's going to insert another row that's the same size. You'll see it's gone just above it.
Yep.
At which point it's got the same cells, etc. Then I can just take the text.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Okay. And
That's what and then I change the
How did you copy and paste the text? Sorry.
Control C, Control V.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I just found that when I did that, when I put the extra information on the rubric, it didn't carry over. It didn't self-populate in Turnitin.
Oh, okay.
On my rubric, it came up blank for some reason.
Yeah, well, look, it certainly should. I mean, we can have a look at it offline or whatever. That's fine.
And the other thing is, when you're saving the document, there's also a word limit on saving that document too that I found
in the heading. In the title, absolutely.
Yeah,
so this is a really good point. I'm going to save this file now. I'll go to Save As. What I've suggested in the guide is that you follow a very, very simple naming convention. So for me, for example, I've put in a subject code, so whatever this might be, if we call it JST 100, the assignment number, and then like one word essentially for what the task is or what the text type is. I don't know what this is, so I'll just call it a report. I know that yours might be longer and more complicated, etc., and a lot of people have longer tasks, but try and keep the naming convention as simple as possible. We hit save. That's now ready to be used in Turnitin. So I can close it, and I'm now going to attach it to an assignment. I can actually, we might do it in one that doesn't have one yet so we can see what it looks like. What was that subject called before? JST, let's try Law 112, maybe. And we'll find out the academics organised and already got a rubric in there. Bound to happen. Okay, so I'm going to the settings. Our rubric section is under our optional settings. And we can see, in fact, that the instructor has added a rubric here. So I'll leave that there, but I am actually going to launch the rubric manager to show you the process for getting a new rubric in. You click Launch Rubric Manager, it opens up this smaller window. At that point, we want to import a new rubric. It's showing me a default one in here that I'm not going to be using. So I'm going to import export up here in the top right. I'm going to import. I'm going to find that Turnitin template that I just saved a minute ago to my desktop. Maybe, did I? Or was it in the folder? Here it is. And what we're looking for is that green tick, which tells me that it hasn't had a problem with the file name and that what's in the cells is recognized by Turnitin, so we don't have any issues at that point. And then I can go back to the rubric manager and click on this menu in the top right-hand corner and find the rubric in your list. Your list is going to be much, much smaller than mine, but that was called JST A2 100. Oh, looks like I have many of them. Excellent. It now brings up a preview of what that looks like. So there it is, this, that, the other. Let me full screen this so we can get a look down the bottom. At the moment, there are three options down the bottom. The 0 on the right indicates a qualitative rubric, which is the one where we're just selecting the cells. It doesn't have anything to do with calculating the score. The next one along is custom, and the final one is quantitative. If I click on the final one, quantitative allows you to determine what the score is for the entire column, but it also allows you to determine weighting for each criterion. Okay, so if that's something that you require, where from the total score of the task, different criterion have different weights, you can use the quantitative tool to determine those. Keeping in mind, the whole column is still going to get the same value, but then the weighting will kick in and calculate what that works out to be. Yeah, I mean, it starts to hurt my head a little bit thinking about this sometimes, because none of this actually is telling me how much the total task is worth. That could be a different value, could be worth 40% of the student's mark, but this is for this particular task. So even if I took the view that a high distinction was going to be worth 100%, a distinction was going to be worth 84, for example, whatever, the credit was going to be worth 65, and whatever, 50% for a fail and less than a fail was 35. I've still determined a single score that's going to be applied, or a percentage. Then I kick in my weightings and say, right, first criterion is actually 20, and that's 10, and blah, blah, go through there, figure those out. And then when I save this, when I start clicking on each of those cells, it will calculate those individual scores for me. If I was to turn around and actually use the custom option, what it does is doesn't allow for weightings of criterion. It allows me to determine the individual cell value as a preset value. And then when I click on those cells, it gives me that score. So no weighting, just the actual preset value. So if I said that a high distinction for criterion 1 was in fact 18 out of 20, or whatever the number might be, you predetermine those. And then when we use the rubric, it will calculate those scores to give us our final grade. It also will convert the score in here into whatever the task value was, if these are not the same. So we had an example, I think, when we were looking at rubrics the other day. The task was marked out of 100, but the assessment was only worth 20% for the student. It does the conversion for you and will convert that percentage mark into whatever it is out of 20. That goes into the score at the top when we're doing our marking, wherever that might be, and flows through to the grade center. So I realize that, you know, this is a bit hypothetical in a way, and really until you start putting your own rubrics in and we have a play with the scores and the values and see what the rubric looks like, that's when you're going to be, I guess, more comfortable about what choice you're going to make. You can swap and change, come back to it, try something different, etc. if you want to, but Turnitin itself in the feedback studio only has those 3 options: qualitative, custom, quantitative. Judith?
So the custom one's the only one that will adjust if I have a rubric that's worth 100% and then want to convert that to a 20% or 40% for the overall assessment.
They both will convert.
They both will, okay.
Yep, absolutely. But the difference being the custom one, you have to predetermine what the individual cell values are. Quantitative, you only put it in once for the whole column. The whole column's worth X. With the custom one, you have to put in that individual number for each cell value. Yep. Lisa. You're muted at the moment, sorry.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Just following on from what Judith had said, so, and just for my clarification, so if in here my rubrics out of 100, so the student gets, let's say, 85 out of 100, but in Blackboard, or I2, sorry, it's actually that assessment item is set up as 40%. Will it go into Blackboard as 85, or will it adjust to the 40% when it's populated into Blackboard?
Okay, so if you're using a qualitative or a custom rubric, it will do the conversion for you and change the score, because when you create the task in Turnitin, you're putting in the I2 value for the task, how much it's worth.
Yeah.
So it does the conversion between the rubric and the task value, does that automatically, and then that's passed through to the grade center.
Yeah, but so if you're using the quantitative, it won't. You'll have to make your own adjustments in grade center.
Qualitative.
Oh, qualitative. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Brendan.
In these criterion that you've got here, you've only got one specific value. We often use a range here. So say, for example, we give the credit 65 to 75 for say between like 4 and 6. And then we score this as a 5 or 4.5. Can we do that now on this system, or does it only take one value?
Only takes the one value. Yeah,
Okay.
you're gonna have to manually tally it separately on the side, or if you're using that.
No, what I mean
table,
by the what I mean by the one value is, say if I'm scoring, we tend to score across a rubric. Like, so we might say actually part of the paper is really well written here. So I might give a distinction for the first part in this one criterion, but then I might give you a pass mark here. And so then as a result, I'm actually going to give you, like, say, a credit, but I'm not just giving a credit as the final mark. I'm giving the credit as, say we use these numbers 65 to 74. I give this number like say 66. You know what I mean? And then when we add it all up, then that becomes the total of the paper, and then that total of the paper determines if they've got a high distinction credit or pass.
Sure.
So
I think it's important, Brendan, I think it's important to understand that all of our assessments are marked out of 100%. Now they'll be converted back to whatever the percentage is, or what the weighting is for the assessment is within the subject. But all of our assessments, except the satisfactory or unsatisfactory ones, all of them are marked out of 100%.
100%. I understand that. That's fine. It's when we mark here in rubrics, we don't just give one mark. We don't just give one score. We give.
Oh, I understand what you're saying, because that's why I've got my hand up as well. So Lachlan, if you could just,
Yep.
I'm just wondering, I know that we have lost some people because they have had other meetings to go to.
Sure.
I'm wondering whether we should restart. We've got another session on Thursday, I believe. I wonder if we should restart the conversation at the Thursday's meeting on rubrics.
Look, I'm happy to do that. I don't have a problem with that. People have got things to get to, obviously, and I don't think that this is going to be a simple conversation as such, because people are going to need to have different approaches to this. But whether or not it's manually tallying or trying to get the custom rubrics to work the way that you want them to, etc. You can't grade within a range within this tool, though, is what I'm getting at the moment with the way that it's provisioned. So that means whilst you can select cells to give an indication of where their attempt is sat, you're going to have to manually calculate what those scores equal at the moment. That seems to be what's going to need to happen from my perspective at the moment. That's not to say that won't change. Now, Patience, you've had your hand up for a while. Can I help you?
Yes, please. Lachlan, thank you for the opportunity. In this case, I was just trying to support what Brendan is saying. I'm thinking maybe it's the same thing in terms of the marking rubric, because as I can see what you have there being displayed, you have high distinction is 18 and then distinction is 12. However, our marking rubric usually comes at in a range. For instance, we have 8.5 to 10 out of 10 as a high distinction, and then 7.5 to 8 as a distinction, and then 6.5 to 7 as a credit, and it continues like that. Instead of it being just one specific value, it comes as a range. So does this allow us to put in that range, or we just need to put one single number? And if so, in which one are we putting? Are we putting 10? Are we putting 8.5? Because 8.5 will still be a high distinction.
Yeah, look, it doesn't allow you to grade within a range. Essentially, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to manually tally the scores for the individual criterion and then enter the grade when you're marking the paper. If I can bring that up again, at the top, as this, once you've calculated it outside of turn it in. So whilst you might have used the rubric to actually select where their attempt sat, it's not going to give you a score or tally the score for you. If you need to score between a range, you're going to have to keep a note of that separately as you're marking to determine that grade, because it will only allow you to do one fixed value, either one fixed value for each criterion cell or one fixed value for the whole column. That's its level of flexibility. Yep.
Okay. So while we're on there, so which value are we taking in terms of the fixed value? Do we get 8.5 or do we get a 10? Is it the lower value that we get for
It's up to you.
which
It's up to you when you set it up. If you're going to set if you're going to use those values, the custom or the quantitative, you would need agreement, obviously, with your marking team, etc., of what score you were going to use. I only saw that used twice in the first session, and that was when the marking team agreed that they wanted to have certain numbers used for fixed value. It might not be possible for you to do that because you want to grade within a range, or the task isn't set up like that, and I completely understand that, but it doesn't I guess it doesn't change the functionality of the tool set. I can't change that. Brendan, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, so I'm just assuming that the 25 out of 25, that's pulling that data from when you set up the Turnitin. So if its weighting is 50%, then that would have been 50%. So this weighting obviously on this assignment is 25.
That's correct. So
okay.
the I2 value, like the task value for the student, is 25.
And we can then manually put in any number here.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, you would enter that
different.
Up top.
This is the only reason why this is not how we mark. Well, from my experience within our discipline within nursing, is that we don't just give one value for one specific section. So it might change the way in which we award the scores.
Yeah, and look, I'm really interested to see, I guess, how that discussion unfolds, whether or not it prompts a change, or whether you make it work for you with outside of Turnitin and are just using it just to enter the grade and the feedback. Ultimately, I'm not sure, but I'll be interested to see how that progresses. Look, I'm going to take Jen's cue from before. I'm obviously aware that people have time restraints and things, and we can certainly pick the conversation up more on Thursday. As several of you have got sort of bookings with me to go through looking at rubrics and assignments and things tomorrow and the day after, etc. And if anyone else would also like to do so, please reach out and we'll find a time to help with that aspect.
So Lachlan, the next Turnitin meeting is Thursday, the 7th. It starts at 9 a.m. So if we could pick up this conversation, I think it's important that we have as many people here at this next meeting as possible, so that I can see that there's some confusion about which one of these rubrics do we use in relation to the school, so that there's a degree of standardisation, not just for the markers, but also for the students' expectations, so they can see what's coming back to them and how their feedback is. So if we can pick this up on Thursday morning, that'd be ideal. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take it easy.
Okay, bye.